Hello and welcome everybody. I am Lalita Dupron. I'm the Associate Director for the Center for South Asia at Stanford. And I just want to welcome everybody. A good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening, depending on what time zone you're in. We have many people registered from South Asia. And so thank you for making time for us very late in your evening. Before I introduce my friend and colleague Aziz Sohail, who will be moderating today's webinar, I want to acknowledge that Stanford is an occupier of the ancestral and unceded land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. We are grateful to be guests on this land, and we commit to solidarity to indigenous struggles. Today's webinar is the penultimate event in the Center for South Asia's webinar series this academic year. We have one more virtual event this coming Wednesday, May 25th, organized by our Center for South Asia and Markaz undergraduate fellow Ravi Tarigadaba. And that will be a conversation between Akar Patel, who's the chair for Amnesty International India, and Meenakshi Ganguly, who's the South Asia director of Human Rights Watch. And that's going to be from 6 to 7 p.m. Pacific time. So if you want to attend that, if it works with your time zone, please follow us on social media or visit us at southasia.stanford.edu and you can register there. To today's event, Aziz Sohail is an art curator, writer, and researcher whose work is focused on building interdisciplinary connections and supporting new cultural and pedagogical infrastructures. Since 2020, with the many-headed Hydra, they have been co-leading a language where yesterday and tomorrow are the same word. Kal, a trans-oceanic platform supporting practices in acting queer, pasts, futures, and decolonial ecologies. Their current research is a meditation on the longue durée intersections of sexuality and colonialism with migration, law, and identity through the work of practitioners who navigate empire and its afterlives. I know empire is Aziz's favorite word, and will no doubt come up in today's conversation. Their current curated exhibition, Archival Intimacies, is currently at the One Archive at the University of Southern California in LA. So for one more week, so if you are in the Los Angeles area, I very much recommend that you go and visit that while you still can. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Aziz. I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you so much, Lalita, for this amazing intro and also for this invitation and to have Mehrub here today. I always joke with everyone that there's a official bio and then there's like the unofficial bio. So I will first read out Mehrub's official bio just because Mehrub is so accomplished and sort of just running around creating a trailblazing path, but then I also just want to say some personal words before we go. So, but just before we set that tone, I just wanted to sort of set the format a bit for us today. So we will be, Mehrub and I we have this chemistry where we've been kind of, I mean, we've known each other for like now, I don't think it's 10 years, but I would say like 8, 9, 7, I don't know. There's a time before in life, the pandemic. 10 years, okay. Well, 2013 onwards. And, but we've met in Lahore, in Karachi, in multiple locations, in DC. And so we're just gonna kind of make it like, we have a few questions prepared. We have some like sort of media that we wanna show, but we'll also keep it very open-ended, very conversational. We also understand that the audience here is very diverse. I can see there's a lot of people joining us from Pakistan, but also know there's a lot of people joining us from the United States framework, from the diaspora, from India or South Asia more broadly. So we also want to try and kind of make it such that, you know, you can kind of follow some of the conversations we're having. So you can always ask questions in the Q&A section. And even though, again, as I said, we have some ideas prepared, we want to kind of take questions as they start coming if they feel appropriate so that we can kind of bring you into the conversation. We've kept the chat open because we feel like it's a great place for people to interact with each other, but we will be monitoring for any hate speech in Urdu, Hindi, English, sort of any transphobia, any homophobia, any queerphobia, and you will be immediately taken off. Like this is not like a space of news, like online debate or something for us. So having said that, let's take it away. We'll be around for an hour, including Q&A and showing things. Dr. Mehrub Moiz Awan is a khwajasira activist and global policy practitioner with a strong interest in institutional and governance reform in post-colonial states and issues of gender and sexuality. Her methodology is transdisciplinary and utilizes elements of human-centered design thinking, participatory ethnography, systems thinking, and econometrics. She has consulted previously for the World Bank in DC, International Center for Research on Women, and the International Committee of the Red Cross. She's a doctor of medicine and obtained her master's in global health policy as a Fulbright scholar from the George Washington University in the US. And nowadays she's based in Karachi, and all over Pakistan. She's consulting for national organizations as well as government on evidence-based reform in multiple arenas. And in the last year, she's also, I mean, she's been been an important khwajasira activist, but she's been trailblazing a path in Pakistan, taking on various horrible elements in the country and appearing on media in protests and conversations, leading and organizing. And just having said that, Mehrub is a really dear friend. We've shared many lovely evenings in Karachi and known each other through different journeys of our lives and our making in the world. And I think we've all evolved in the last 10 years in sort of how we think about the world and our role in it. So it's a really big pleasure to have you, Moiz or Mehrub. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Aziz, for having me. And I'm amazed at your biological capability of remembering so many of our meetings, because I blacked out at the end of those, if you're being honest. So I'm glad that at least somebody has kept, a record of all the places that we've met in. So
well, Karachi, Lahore, DC, right? And Boston, maybe, I don't know. But so shall we?
Possibly Islamabad.
Islamabad, yes, as well. So well, the 3 Pakistani cities that I feel like people know, although I know you're working with sort of a range of communities and dialogues. So let's begin, Moiz. I mean, or Mehrub, I wanna just jump in and talk about, because what really happened, and I think part of the reason why this conversation for me started, and I started thinking about it with Lalita and said, we need to do this, is that there was a very big protest, an important protest that you helped organize with the Gender Interactive Alliance in Karachi in October 2021. That was one of the first visible khwajasira trans protests in Pakistan that also centered a lot of joy, a lot of community, a lot of celebration. And I think that also catapulted you to a lot of visibility, right? Because there was a lot of presence there, a lot of media presence there. And we have some clips of that protest, but maybe you want to set the stage for us about what was happening in that protest. Because I think that was a very turning point for many things about visibility and groundingness of the community at that time.
So Aziz, the short story to that is that I was apprehended and attacked in a failed attack, I would like to say, which was supposed to be an abduction and a gang rape at the hands of this criminal syndicate that organizes itself around its violent interest in transgender bodies in Pakistan. And as we know, urbanness attracts chaos and chaos attracts violence. And in the case of Karachi, this chain is multiplied by almost 100-fold because of the multiple tapestries of violence that the city has had to endure and to observe. So the protest was organized for me by the Gender Interactive Alliance and my guru and my trans sisters, who were kind enough to put it all together, and my friends at that particular time. However, the conversation that it really started is that it introduced the mainstream society, or as we like to call them in Urdu, dunyadar, to the vernacular of the trans community or the khwajasira community. And one of the words in our language is that of bilayat, which is an attitude, which is where when you denigrate transgender people and when you look down upon them, and that denigration sort of results in violence and disregard. And that is also present in a lot of our intimate relationships as well as commercial relationships, because as a khwajasira person in Pakistan who is performing at events, not me, but my sisters do, many of them do, commerciality and sexuality are all often conflated with each other. You are sexually available and you are commercially available. So there is always a price for which you can be obtained. And that price can be masculinity that the other person is willing to pay, or that price can be violence, or it can be actual money that is given to you. And it is within the ambit of this interaction that a lot of bilas and a lot of bila men
You want to, sorry, you want to
fourscore.
jump in and clarify what Bila is, because I feel like many people might not know the term.
Yes, so Bila, like I said, Bila is a word that originated in our khwajasira language. We have our own language that only we can speak. We gatekeep it quite tightly. Other queer people are welcome into it as well. And of course, the words flow in and flow out. But other than that, only trans women in Pakistan are fluent in this language. And within that, the word Bila basically means a bad man, a man who's violent, a man who's a badmash, a thug, anybody, something like that. And it's an attitude. And the person who espouses this attitude is the person who is a Bila. So the protest basically spoke a lot about organized violence against the transgender community, where, for instance, if trans people are going to perform at an event as a dancer, and that's where they are supposed to earn some money, and on their way back, they will be attacked by those men. So it opened up a conversation on how systemic the violence on trans people is, and how the state and the police has been absolutely incapable of sorting it out, because to them, it's always trans people who are the criminals. It's they who are attracting this sort of violence, or the fact that this violence even exists in our society is because trans people are actually present in the society. So I think it changed the conversation quite a lot on that. And it was also the first time that I publicly came out as a khwajasira person. I mean, I was always considered a trans feminine person, or a person who is a little critical of gender roles. But I think it was also my first public coming out to the people of Pakistan as a trans person or as a khwajasira person. And so it was like these two things, an opening up of a conversation around this larger systemic issue, and then of my visibility as a public figure, as a man before, queer man nonetheless, but man, not man still, to a khwajasira person or a transgender person. So there was, I think, that public shift, that public transition has never really happened in the public purview of Pakistan or any other Islamic society before, or even global societies. What example do we have? Elliot Page, one. So I think that was quite a lot of uncharted territory. So it roused some curiosities among the people that were following me.
So in that way, it's also a very personal history for you, as well as, of course, a broader political national history that you're trying to paint. I actually maybe want to jump in here, and actually maybe we will share, I will share my screen now, and a bit of the, Moiz sort of, Mehrub kind of leading the world at that time and kind of organizing this. Okay, why are you like, you're just like, oh my God, no, but it's actually fabulous. So we're just gonna do this, okay? Can everyone hear what I'm saying?
कि इन खुसरों को बाहर निकालो, ये खुसरे हमारे हैं, आ जाओ, हम बाहर आ गई हैं, आ जाओ, हम बाहर आ गई हैं, तुम्हें ये बताने के लिए कि हम छीन के लेंगी।
So we'll stop sharing here. Because, and again, I just want to say that I don't think you or many people expected sort of what this moment would become, right? I mean, it's like, we can always look back, and this is like recent history, as we say, but it's still history now in so many ways, where people kind of look at what moments become. But I think that was a moment in which, like, I saw like crazy amount of social media, tweeting. It's not like you had an official this is all like Instagram stuff that then people are pulling from each other, all of that. And I kind of want to start kind of thinking a bit here about like, because here you also started talking about indigeneity and spirituality. And I just want to acknowledge that I know that a lot of this stuff is in Urdu. I'm okay with the fact that people can't access like, as I joke with Mehrub, I'm like, it's okay, like not everyone has to access our language and our discourse, but we can also unpack, like, do you want to just sort of talk a little bit about like what you're saying at that protest? And sort of, I want to talk about the symbolism after that of the various elements of alam and all that you're using as well.
So basically, while I was being attacked, it was because I was present inside a car, and the people who were surrounding us kept on saying that is khusre ko bahar nikalo, which basically means send this F word out, or tranny out, whatever way you want to basically use that word or translate that word into English. So basically, that's what I was saying, that, well, here we are. What are you going to do now? And there's, Aziz, the problem basically with Pakistan is that a lot of times when people stand up and they try to voice their concerns, and they want to do it in a way that is relatable for them and very proximal to the people in their community and vicinity, often at times they can't do it, because we have to position or locate our discourse and our politics and our anger within some larger rhetoric, either of human rights or of nationally dictated Islam or nationalism, one way or the other. And as khwajasira people, of course, we live lives that are very anarchist. We live within a state and a society that is deeply antagonistic towards us, not simply because of its own patriarchal accord, but because of the colonial histories and violences that have been blessed to us by our colonial masters of yesterday, the Britishers. So it's quite difficult to construe a discourse or a narrative that is relatable to yourself, yet is neatly able to be fit into a larger national discourse or a global discourse. It's a very big problem. And the big reason for that is that a lot of the human rights discourse and politics that happens in the world carries this baggage of mandatory secularity or mandatory secularism.
It's also, of course, who's funding it, right? Like, where is the funding for this type of work coming for this human rights? Sorry, activism, sorry to interrupt you. Yeah.
Possibly. It's if it's not about where the money for it is coming from, it's to whom are you playing? Who's your audience? Whom are you positioning it for? And often at times it is either the global audience, the global West, or it is the Pakistani liberal intelligentsia, which perhaps is much more persuasive and adamant about espousing that mandatory secularism. And I, as somebody who has been through a history of atheism, agnosticism, anti-theism, secularity, all of those things as an activist in Pakistan, understand that anxiety. But now as a khwajasira person, I am also quite post-secular in my approach, because that is what our reality is. Khwajasira women ask for their rights, and they believe, and they truly believe, that Islam grants them fundamental rights, which it does. There are multiple fatwas in our favor. In fact, fun fact, when we were lobbying for our Transgender Persons Act in 2016, and then when we got it passed in 2018, at that particular time, the religious lobby went one step further and openly declared that we should also be lobbying for the right to marriage. And we are the ones who backed off and said, no, we don't want that, because number one, our seniors, our elders, they are predominantly asexual, and their version of khwajasirayat disagrees with the idea of marriage of khwajasira people, because we are not supposed to be dunyadars. We are supposed to be fakirs. We are supposed to be Sufis. We are supposed to shed worldly pleasures for the hereafter. And basically that's how the rhetoric goes. And number two, because we know, even if we begin lobbying for it, or even if we get this right, immediately the backlash next day is going to be that these are men pretending to be women so that they can legalize homosexuality in the country. So we stayed away from it. But the idea basically is that khwajasira women, a lot of our rituals of khwajasirayat revolve around Shia Islam, or Molayyat, as we call it. We do not call it Shia Islam. We call it Molayyat. That's how it is done. So there was this alam that was raised in our protest as well. And there was dhamal that we did in the end. And dhamal is something that happens at most Sufi shrines. And when we trans women go to Sufi shrines, we go all decked up. We go dressed up. So when I go to Seven Sharif, which is the image that you've pulled up, I go as Lal Shabaz Kalandar ki Dulhan. It is not that I'm actually married to him. It is not that I believe myself to be his wife. That is a very heteronormative, heterosexual, sexually organized way of thinking. It's about understanding that there are people in this world who transcend gender, who transcend class, who transcend materiality. And it is through that that they're able to find their soul, their spirit, and hence God. And we succumb and prostrate to that sort of, what should I say, sacrifice of the self in order to build a better relationship with the self, and through that with God. And a lot of trans women and khwajasira people in Pakistan go through that process, which modernity has taken away from what I would like to call the educated trans women of today. So the alam was raised because alam symbolizes the struggle of Imam Hussein at Karbala. And it was one of our Shia members who raised the alam. And there was quite a lot of backlash actually by some conservative hardline Shia groups on why an alam was raised. when some trans women's heads were uncovered, etc. So, there was that typical sanctimonious moral policing as well that happened as a result of it. But simultaneously, a lot of Muslim people and a lot of Shia Muslims in Pakistan saw the image and they related with it immediately. They were like, now we get you. Now we get your struggle. Now we get the struggle of your people. And the bravery with which you've raised this alam basically inspires us to support your cause and support your people further. So I think that is why the symbolism in that was important, because we had to show that we are not from somewhere else, and to prove it to the people, not just prove it to the people, but demonstrate it to them how we are in a manner, a glue, a uniting glue of the society, where we bring in so many factions and so many streams of thoughts together to talk about violence and oppression and power.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, that's a lot that you're bringing in as well, right? Like to kind of be that uniting glue. I mean, I was just last week at UC Santa Barbara doing some workshops with Dr. Debanuj Dasgupta's trans studies class. And Dr. Debanuj Dasgupta, for those who don't know, has been working with and researching trans communities specifically in India, but also on the border regions with Nepal, India, Bangladesh, India. And what was really beautiful, what they were talking to their students about, is that in this Western discourse framework, transness, or trans, like the language that people use for and kind of understand, it's also kind of comes through like a medical kind of history, and kind of has been medicalized, and also is very specifically set. And of course the way the US works, because Lalita will say this, because it's empire, right? Which means it's dominating in terms of in hegemony and discourse in the world, which we're all, by the way, fundamentally kind of part of. I mean, we're talking at Stanford, but I mean, Mehrub, you studied in DC on a Fulbright scholarship. I came here for grad school, right? We're all been implicated in this kind of global discourse. But the thing is, how do you kind of decenter that discourse as well? And that's something in that class that we're discussing, is the way transness then is mapped onto the rest of the world comes from a Eurocentric or American and then Western European history that also has come out of like dysphoria and kind of certain kind of histories, right? And then kind of unpacking that through psychology and through medical kind of framework. And like the central kind of core should be that transness itself is not exacted, right? It's not stable. It's a category that's also continuously shifting, and also on a spectrum, and also the way people identify. And I think that's something that you're starting to bring up here. I want to just kind of touch base, because here, you talk about the alam and you talk about visibility, you also use the word indigeneity in your work, that this is an indigenous movement, that this is a grounded movement. And of course, indigeneity in a global way, in different contexts in the world, has different kind of constructions. We're living in a settler colonial society, even though we don't necessarily think of ourselves living in a settler colonial society in Pakistan. All these countries, replicate settler coloniality in different localized frameworks. What do you say what do you mean when you use the word indigenous, and how do you kind of work with that?
So Aziz, that is the issue with American hegemony. And it's not just American conservative hegemony, like Trump and Bush are the stalwarts of it in recent times, but it's also American liberal hegemony, on how this idea of American exceptionalism, and then how the white liberals of America in particular, specifically the ones on the East Coast, I would like to point out, because I went to DC, so I get to, take a crap on them a little bit, how they believe that they have achieved that civilization, that idea of liberal civilization. And now other societies, specifically brown and black societies, must also achieve them. And it is somehow their white savior responsibility to come and assist us in realizing our LGBTQIA+ identities, and somehow retrofitting or future fitting ourselves into that particular model. Whereas we argue that we've already been here forever. And we've been documented and we've been talked about. And it was never about our body. It was always about our soul. It was always about our performance. It was always about our behavior and our role in the society, and less to do with what we have between our legs. So that idea, even now in Pakistan, when we talk about khwajasira, people ask, but wo hote kya hai? What are they? Ladke hote hain ki ladkiyan hoti hain? And it's very interesting, because this is so wrong, not ethically, but just logically. Because when they say wo ladke hote hain ya ladkiyan, they're actually not asking the question. They're asking, do they have a penis or do they have a vagina? Or do they have a phallus like something? Or do they have a vagina like something? That is essentially the question. But they ask, is it a man or is it a woman? So even in the South Asian modern discourse, now living in this post-colonial society where these hegemonies have existed and perpetuated themselves through very violent means for a very long time, through centuries, I would like to say, that that even now when this idea of the khwajasira identity comes up, we must locate it and position it not just within the body, but within genitalia. And that's what decolonizing trans discourse means to me. That is what indigenizing it means to me, because we have always existed and we've always talked about it in the language of the soul. So you can walk over to any impoverished, uneducated, illiterate, take all of those oppression checkboxes and tick it, and you find that trans woman in Pakistan and you ask her, who are you? And why are you like this? Explain your existence to me. And she will say, I have a woman's soul inside of me. This argument, this narrative has zero room in modern biomedical sciences, in Euro-Western medical sciences. And it is this sheer lack of imagination, or maybe there's a better phrase that will come to me, or a better word instead of lack, impossibility. The sheer impossibility of imagination in the Western biomedical discourse that results in this. Well, what the hell is that?
But Mehrub, can I just push back here? I'm also interested because, and I want to kind of start bringing the conversation we've been having about between visibility and backlash, right? You've talked about the Transgender Rights Bill 2018, which maybe we can also go a bit in depth about. I don't know what the, again, audience kind of understanding of that bill is, but fundamentally, when you're working with those kind of constructions, you're working with the state, you're working with the constitution, working with law, right? And law, as we know, works through binaries. It works through, again, like, making things kind of not nuanced necessarily, but kind of placing them in specific categorizations, right? We've just had the census in Pakistan after 20 years because Pakistan's a mess. For the first time in the census, transgender or Quadricera communities were counted, totally undercounted, right? But people were again forced to identify themselves in a box, right? So I'm just trying to push back, just having a conversation with you. What fun, like this push and pull, right? Because you're talking about this kind of spectrum that is looser, that is more open, that is allowing room for also interpretation where people are able to kind of identify the way they want and kind of decolonizing. But then you're also trying to work with the state for inclusivity, right? Which the state is granting you, right? In so many ways. And we can talk about that, right? It's giving people kind of fundamental rights that are enshrined in the Constitution. And we're trying to get them. Right. And again, that has been like long debates and conversations. You've had many working groups for that. You've kind of been working with different parties. But what does that process do? Does it not also fix transness in a category within Pakistan? Does it not fix khwajasira-ness in a specific definition? And does that then kind of, in an unfortunate way, like kind of just push you into a specific direction? Do you know what I mean?
Well, welcome to modernity, Aziz. What can we all do? We have to work with some structures of the state and somehow force ourselves into the model of statism in one way or the other. However, with the Transgender Persons Protection Act 2018, that is specifically what we aimed to not do. It was the first piece of legislation, I would like to argue, in the world that simultaneously protects a group of people from the state and tries to prevent the state from misgoverning them in the future. And that is because we have learned lessons from our British masters that were here, and their entire agenda of colonization was in one way or the other biopolitics. So we understand how codifying or embodying citizenship as a man or as a woman and now as a transgender person is precisely the same thing. Because when we say that I am a male Pakistani, then you have to be male and Pakistani both. When you say I'm a female Pakistani, you have to be female and Pakistani both. And as a male Pakistani, you have certain responsibilities, patriarchal responsibilities that you bear towards your society and towards the state. As a female Pakistani, you have some, and you know what they are codified or in society or in law, and you're supposed to fulfill them. What the hell happens when it comes to us? Because the khwajasira embodied citizen has never really existed. Does it mean we get a blank canvas of nationalism or nationhood and we get to be our best selves in whatever way possible? Awesome, great. Well, that's our ideal, but that's not the reality. That is never going to happen because there is going to be pushback. And the pushback has precisely been on that. the pushback that Jamaat-e-Islami, one of the political parties in Pakistan, has categorically mounted on the Transgender Persons Act is specifically on the definition of transgender person, where they believe that self-perceived gender identity, this particular phrase, needs to be taken out. And it's ironic, because when we in Pakistan talk about self-perception, we talk about self-perception through self-acknowledgement, self-realization, self-actualization, that are all very Muslim Sufi processes. For instance, Baba Bulle Shah said, "Par pad ilm hazar kitaban kade apne aap nu padhiya hi nahi, te ja ja vardha mandar masjid kade nafs apne che vadiya hi nahi." So a khwajasira person who has transcended all of these epistemologies and knowledges that are gate kept and just seeked within to understand what their reality is, what his, her, or their reality is, and the state now acknowledges it in the definition of a transgender person, is precisely the thing that is being attacked. So we try to prevent it, but actors or stakeholders, not actors, stakeholders within the state who have hegemony, who have power, specifically power of defining gender through religious discourse or through religious governmental discourse, are pushing back against it. That's what they have challenged right now in the Federal Shariat Court of Pakistan. That is the case that our community is fighting. And that is, it's interesting, Aziz, because you know what they have done is they've given birth to this argument where they don't openly denounce trans rights. They say we accept trans rights, but we only accept it for people who were born this way. And we are saying, well, we were born this way because we were born with a soul in our body. And we all acknowledge and find out that soul as we age, because finding yourself is ishq. It's love. It's a journey.
So again, when they're saying born this way, they're going back to a specific medical birth category.
But they are going back to a specific medical one, denouncing that a soul actually exists, whereas soul as an entity, as a tangible entity, has already been adjudicated upon by the Pakistan Shariat Court, the Federal Shariat Court, in 1990, when it legalized abortion, when it said that a fetus, ensoulment of a fetus happens at 120 days. Before that, it is asqat-e hamal. After that, it is asqat-e jani, and these are the two separate conditions under which both of them are allowed. So the Federal Shariat Court of Pakistan already acknowledges the soul as a tangible entity. It has already adjudicated upon it. But when it comes to trans people, the Jamaat-e-Islami is basically taking an alternative discourse. It's suddenly become a modernist scientific party that is willing to accept intersex people as trans people. Now, this is gross. This is downright disgusting, because what they're basically saying is that children who are intersex but were raised as boys or girls, and they are not trans because they're happy with their identity, they themselves identify as boys and girls. What are you going to do now? Pick them up from their homes and turn them into khwajasiras? Ask them to get a guru? Ask them to become a chela of someone? What? This is ridiculous, because when we talk about khwajasira acceptance, we are talking about khwajasira as a culture, khwajasira as a gendered spirituality, khwajasira as a way of being,
as a full embodiment,
as a history, not a body. And what they are saying is that no, we are only going to give these particular rights to a certain group of genitalia, when that particular group of genitalia isn't even asking for those rights. So that is the pushback that we are getting. I mean, the state is trying to define us a certain way, not the state. I would like to say one stakeholder within the state is trying to define us a certain way, and they have a lot of street power. We have ended up defining us as a certain way. We have some street power, and maybe we are going to have some showdowns now, because we are now planning our Sindh Aurat March, which is going to be Pakistan's first official transgender march. It is going to be followed by marches in all provinces. And you've seen mob power on the streets.
So talking about the showdown, let's bring up a showdown that you had online recently. Well, not online, in the media. So, well, just also for people who are, I'm not sure again what is the kind of a full kind of understanding, but Jamaat-e-Islami is one of Pakistan's oldest, most prominent Islamic. I don't know if would we say it's an Islamist party? I don't actually.
It's an Islamist party, but it's particularly modernist.
Modernist.
They're Islamic modernists,
and they have roots in kind of colonial India and kind of through the making of kind of Pakistan. And
it was literally, it's a party that was conjured in response to colonial Christianity. So it's a party that is born out of colonial anxieties.
Yeah, so it's one of the main political kind of, even though they've actually not won a lot of seats all the time, but they've come and gone in different ways, and they have a lot of street power, as Mehrub said. So now you had this major debate with a representative of Jamaat-e-Islami in Pakistan, which was, and I kind of also want to talk about here about visibility and backlash, which we kind of said we would talk about, but again, like how media representation works, but it's like, so, and we can set the context again about where visibility is, but IBA University is a university in Karachi, and there was a particular event there that kind of led to a kind of a backlash, right, as well. And then this kind of became about this debate. And so you're kind of here fiercely online, on TV, kind of debating with the representative Jamaat Islami, which I will play a bit of that just because I think it's so powerful for us to see that.
Aziz,
again,
I also want to point out that the TV channel on which I was live is the equivalent of Breitbart meets Fox News of Pakistan.
Yes, bold news. We will just, I'll just play this bit.
बहुत कमजोर हो रहा है. So 16 दिसंबर 2021 को खैबर पख्तूनख्वा में इनके अमीर सराजुल हक साहब ने पीटीआई के खिलाफ बयानात भी दिए और उन्होंने पीटीआई को स्टेटस को की पार्टी ही कहा और उनसे बिल्कुल कुछ ही हफ्तों के आगे पीछे की बात है कि इनके वाहिद जो सेनेटर मौजूद है सेनेट के अंदर, सेनेटर मुश्ताक अहमद साहब, उन्होंने ट्रांसजेंडर पर्सन्स प्रोटेक्शन बिल 2018 को चैलेंज किया और उसको बहुत बेबुनियाद बातों के ऊपर और अन इस्लामिक प्रोविजंस इंट्रोड्यूस करने की बात की, जिसके अंदर ख्वाजा सराओं की बेहुरमती, बेपर्दगी की जाएगी डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल के ऊपर. वो तमाम इल्जामात जो पीटीआई गवर्नमेंट के ऊपर लगाए जा रहे थे जेआई की जानिब से, उसके खिलाफ सेनेटर मुश्ताक अहमद साहब ने एक बिल भी प्रेजेंट नहीं किया. नंबर 2, 2010 के अंदर जब पाकिस्तान के अंदर एलजीबीटी का टर्म पहली दफा इस्तेमाल हुआ था, वो अमेरिकन एम्बेसी ने यूज किया था और अमेरिकन एम्बेसी के बाद जमात इस्लामी ने, ख्वाजा सराओं की किसी तंजीम ने, हमारी किसी लोकल तंजीम ने, उसके ऊपर बेअक्सर औकात इल्जाम लगाया जाता है, उन्होंने भी आज तक एलजीबीटी का वर्ड इस्तेमाल नहीं किया. पाकिस्तान के अंदर एलजीबीटी का वर्ड इस्तेमाल करती है या तो अमेरिकन तंजीमें या उनके जवाब में रिएक्ट करने के लिए जमात इस्लामी, सिर्फ और सिर्फ गे पैनिक यानी कि पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ फियर के जरिए अपना वोट बैंक इंक्रीज करने के लिए, बिकॉज दे हैव लॉस्ट द मैंडेट एंड द कॉन्फिडेंस ऑफ द पाकिस्तानी पीपल.
चलिए ये तो आप करा, मैं आप पूछना चाहूंगी सामा साहब से कि आप क्या कहना चाहेंगे इस बारे में.
नहीं, देखिए, मैंने पहले भी इस बात की तरदीद की है और एक असेंबली में कानून साजी होना वो एक अलग इशू है. पॉलिटिकल फ्रंट के ऊपर जमात इस्लामी ने इस किस्म की किसी भी इशू के ऊपर कोई एक्टिविटी नहीं की है. यहाँ पे आईबीए वाले जिस की जानिब आप निशानदेही करना चाह रही हैं, इसके ऊपर भी जमात इस्लामी ने कोई रिएक्ट नहीं किया.
लेकिन यहाँ हम बात करें एलजीबीटीक्यू की, हम ट्रांसजेंडर.
Oh my God, wait, this is like the horrible. Okay, I'm just gonna stop here because I hate YouTube ads. But this is also a really visible moment, right, of kind of debate where you're taking on a very grounded, intense, there's been violence.
Are you in sales and marketing? Let me show you the easiest
wait.
way to find a prospect's contact info. So
I thought I would turn that off. It didn't turn off. Wait. This is when you need to have a YouTube, your own like channel or whatever. Anyways, so Mehrub, do you want to talk a bit about this particular moment as well? What's happening here?
So
And
Aziz, this is basically, like I say, we Pakistani people are always stuck between the US trying to be the savior on one side and always failing miserably at it, and Jamaat Islami on the other. Let's forget about what happened over there. Let's forget about what I was even saying. Just a few days ago, on the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia, US Embassy Islamabad, from their Twitter account, tweeted this, that the Mission Pakistan works to strengthen civil support, blah, 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 for the LGBTQIA+ community. They did it in 2022, which is this year. And then the last time they did it, this was back in 2010, when they basically held a pride event in which all foreign embassy staff who identify as lesbian or gay were invited. And they all came there, had some wine, flirted with each other, left. And then the US Embassy Islamabad had the gall to have a news piece printed in local newspapers the next day, proudly declaring how they celebrated it. No local activists were consulted. No local bodies were consulted. And this is ironic that the US continues tweeting about such stuff and talking about these rights when in the US, trans people are being barred in states from playing sports, from going into bathrooms of their own choice, for getting treatment from their medical insurers on their medical insurance. But wow, the US and Pakistan has a mission to protect LGBTQIA+ people. Pray tell me, how many LGBTQIA+ people does the US mission in Islamabad know of? And what services is it providing to them? So this sort of politics, it's a politics of contestation, because Jamaat Islami and parties like these, basically, they rely on the vote bank. They rely on this rhetoric that the West or the Jews or these white people are somehow conspiring against our country. You know, that classic anti-Semitic, anti-imperial rhetoric, the latter half of which, the anti-imperial one of which is great.
Sorry, just to interrupt, there's been a bit of a request here to just like also maybe say exactly what you were saying in Urdu in that debate. So I know it's like, I don't want you to like necessarily, but do you want to summarize a bit about what that exact conversation was?
I'm coming to it. Yeah. I'm coming to it exactly.
Yeah.
So basically what happens is that Jamaat-e-Islami is one political party that continually espouses this rhetoric that, oh my God, people are against us and they are conspiring against us, which they are. There is no doubt about it. But this isn't the conspiracy that they are doing. And that is what they rely on to get their votes. And now suddenly gay panic or LGBTQIA panic or homophobia and transphobia has become their bread and butter, where they are zooming in and they are literally waiting for anybody to use any vernacular or any symbolism that they can then remotely associate with LGBTQIA+ and say that somehow homosexuality is being spread in the country. Nobody knows what homosexuality means. Even the people who coined the term do not know what homosexuality means anymore. Literally, it is such a confusing term because what is it? Is it a man having sex with a man? Is it a woman having sex with a woman? Then okay, then what is sexuality for trans people? Because we are known as the third sex in our country and the government recognizes it as such. So is homosexuality for us having sex with one another? What? It is such a ridiculous Western white British term that even doesn't apply neatly in their own society. So how can you use that word to codify something? But that's the panic that they use. And even now they were doing that. They basically went ahead, they conjured up a false story, created this drama that there was some LGBT party in IBA or an event over there, which there wasn't. There was a students dancing. And then they basically harassed all of those students. And please remember that IBA is a liberal university, seemingly, but it is also the university that gave birth to the killer of Sabeen Mahmood. We should never forget that. We should never forget that rich universities in Pakistan and abroad are always the breeding grounds of this intellectual Islamofascism. It's like Islamism, but on steroids of English, where people can communicate in that vernacular. So I was basically taking him down on that and saying that this entire debate about whether there should be LGBT in Pakistan or not, or whether there was an LGBT event in IB or not, is a false topic. What we need to be talking about is who is raising this gay panic and gay alarm, and how many trans murders are happening in response to it, because that's the real problem. The real problem isn't two people dancing with the rainbow flag in IBA. The real problem is 798 khwajasiras being killed for 100,000 khwajasiras in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The real problem is this open, frank genocide of khwajasira people that is happening in Pakistan, and we do not see a single denouncement from this political party. All we see is them sitting down with binoculars in their hands, waiting for somebody to raise a rainbow flag or to use the word LGBT, or for me to appear somewhere for them to raise this false panic and false alarm, just so that they can get votes. All they have to do is yell in the streets, say, oh, there is homosexuality in Pakistan, LGBT has been spread in Pakistan. We, the protectors of Islam and Pakistani values, are going to save you from it. Please vote for us. And people are going to vote for them. What are we going to do in return?
Which of course is like, those are similar tactics that are being used by the right wing in the US or Republicans in the US. I mean, this is part of the political kind of, right? Like
which is, Aziz, also perhaps the second point that I raised in that debate of mine, because I've worked in the US and I worked in the US as a lobbyist when Trump was in power. So I understand the mechanics of the Republican Party. And I have raised this point multiple times that Jamaat-e-Islami is basically a Republican Party with Urdu subtitles. So often at times they do that. They use the entire methodology, the rhetoric that the far right is using in the West. That is something that they bring home and they turn it into Arabic or Urdu, and they just push it forward.
So here, I just want to do a pivot. We're getting questions and I'm going to end slowly here, but I do want to end a bit on the note of joy and of celebration, of love, of visibility. I know we're talking about all these very deep topics and heavy topics, but I also want to acknowledge that there has been, as we also in the beginning of when we showed the protest, that there's been a lot of visibility, that there has been inclusion, that in the Aurat March that has been happening, for the last 4 years, since 2018, there has been more increasing inclusion of trans communities and Quadricera perspectives, which, by the way, again, like we talked a bit about this, like whereas in UK, in the US, there's this whole other like TERF, trans exclusionary radical feminist movement that is happening. So again, there's also this kind of debate happening in a Pakistani context. And I want to kind of just showcase a couple of moments of visibility and kind of openness, that beautiful things that have been happening, and maybe then ask you to think a bit about the future before we kind of open it up to Q&A. Is that okay, Mehrub?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. So I'm just gonna So the two things are, so one, there is this film by Saim Sadiq, director, called Darling, which, by the way, Saim is like today at Cannes Film Festival. Again, there's a visible trans Quadricera actor in the film that is being shown at Cannes, and it's great that there's Pakistani representation there. But this is a specific moment that I know you talked a lot about, how like this kind of beautiful kind of showcase of, again, trans kind of communities within Pakistan is showcased. I'm just going to
ਮੁੰਡਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੋਕੀ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ, ਬਾਕੀ ਤੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ ਡਿਮਾਂਡ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਨਾ ਯਾਰ।
ਸਰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਮੌਕਾ ਤੇ ਦਿਓ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਯੂਜ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਾਂਗੀ ਸਰ। ਸਰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰ ਦੇਖੋ ਤੇ ਸਹੀ ਡਾਂਸ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੇਰਾ। यार का डांस है स्टार्ट हो गया तो डांस खत्म हो गया तेरा डांस है अभी शुरू हो रहा है ना। वो यार तो मेरी बड़ी वही खेलने आए यार, तुम नहीं करना आए थे। अच्छा कहां पे यार
And I love this moment because I also just love how the trans woman or khwajasira performing is at the center, and then there's all these like men who are just like kind of, she's able to control and kind of perform around. So there's this instance, right? Then there is this recently, like I think just a couple of years ago, again, Coke Studio, which is, for those who follow pop music, I mean, Coke Studio is like the biggest place for experimenting of music and kind of in Pakistan is happening and then being exported around the world right now. And I guess it's a big soft power thing. But they also, with one of the most famous South Asian Faiz Ahmed Faiz's poem, Him Dekhenge We Will See, which has been a great nara or a great kind of, rallying point for activism. Also, when they performed the Hum Dekhenge in 2018, which we can unpack, but they also had, yeah. And I again love this moment because they're like, when one day the people like the Raja Khalke Khuda, so like God's people will rule the world, and then that's when they focus on the trans women or the khwajasiras, that this, which I am and which you are as well. So we're all, kind of like, Khalke Khuda, we're like all God's people. So again, also bringing in kind of, even though I know Faiz was a communist and secularist and socialist, kind of bringing in again kind of the, as you said, kind of the spirituality, the Islamic kind of being in the world. As well. So, and I know your roots are in some way are also as a performer, as a comedian, and I want to show that a bit as well when we talk about joy and comedy and displaying. So.
That to me is insane. Like, you're already crazy.
Just like Swinery, Moiz has created multiple characters, each with their own dedicated fan following.
Lesbians are super unique. Because imagine living in a patriarchal country and saying, "Mujhe nahi chahiye."
Moiz's personas play with gender, drag, and permissibility in comedy.
So, and at that time, you were like being labeled by them as a stand-up comedian, although I know it's much more broader and beyond that. But just coming in, I love that moment. So just coming in, joy, performance, play, visibility. I think there has been increasing cultural visibility in Pakistan, much more mainstream as well. Maybe we end on this note. Where is the future headed? What is that for you? And then we open it to Q&A.
Aziz, it's like, what conversation can we have about the future without talking about climate change? So yeah, and I think that, no, that's precisely where my head is at. That's precisely what I am thinking as one of the political conveners of the Aurat March. Who are we without the land that we live on, without the rivers that feed us, without the trees that have sustained us and have allowed us to, who are we? When I talk about indigeneity and when I talk about celebrating our own joy, which means doing dhamal and raising the alarm at our protests and singing and dancing and relating with our Punjabiyat and our Balochiness and our Sindhiness and our Hazarewalness and our Pashtunness and all of this, all that Coke Studio is based on, all that our protests are based on, all that our international visibility is based on, what are we without our land? What are we without a place to live in?
And I mean, as we say, there is a ridiculous heat wave in South Asia and flooding in India and Bangladesh.
And it's not going to ease out anytime soon. And by the way, Pakistan and India are going to be the worst hit countries by the climate change. So when I look at trans resilience, I look at climate resilience. And I think this is going to be one of the driving themes of our Aurat March as well, saving our rivers, saving Sindhu Desh, basically, River Sindhu and Sindhu Desh, because that is from where the idea of Jhulelal emerges, and the idea of sustainability emerges, and the idea of God flowing through, godliness flowing through the veins and the arteries of Pakistan emerges. That is where we get our identity from. We are the guardians of the soil. We are the guardians of our cultures. So when I look at the trans movement in Pakistan for the future, tangibly speaking, in the next 2-3 years, Aziz, this is my promise. If I do not succeed in this, then inshallah, I'm going to try 1,000,000 times harder, but we are making it to the parliament. We are making it to the parliament. In 2023, by the end of the elections, when the new government forms, you are going to see at least one khwajasira person in the parliament of Pakistan as a proud khwajasira, because our entire community is pushing forward to it.
And there have been again the khwajasiras who have been standing up for elections, right, as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Of
government as well.
Absolutely. And we want to get in, and one of the first bills that we as a community want to work on is going to be on local governance and climate resilience, tying the two together on how.
Also, because again, trans communities are particularly precarious, right? Like all other marginalized communities with, climate like kind of destruction, right, as well.
Because we can't survive anywhere else, Aziz. We are indigenous to khwajasiras, are indigenous to South Asia. I can always go to the US or Canada and New Zealand and live as a transgender woman, but that is just 50% of my identity. The remaining 50% is all that Pakistan gives me, all that South Asia gives me, all that the community around me gives me. So where do I bring that from? Do I raise a 7 Sharif in Auckland? Do I do a Aurat March in Toronto? I mean, what is that? What is the sense of fractured identity? So I think when we look at our future, that future is one of climate resilience. One where we are growing one with nature, where we are putting an end to the idea of extreme accumulation of wealth of the 1%. We need to move away from the 1% and move to oneness. And that is what I see the movement of the future of our movement to be. It's not just about gender identity anymore. It's about ecofeminism. It's about relating with the land that you are living in, giving respect to it, giving empathy to it, and giving empathy and respect to the many cultures and the many peoples and the many histories, the many bloods that people have bled, the many pains that people carry. It's about that. And the third point is truth and reconciliation. Too much harm has been done. Too many people have been killed by people close to them, by people alien to them. We as a nation, we as a region, I would like to say, need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where we talk about all the pains and all the hurts that have been caused to peoples and lands and communities and cultures on our beautiful motherland. And then we move towards a pathway of reconciliation, because I do not think as long as we allow these wounds to fester and do not sit down with a compassionate heart and a heart that seeks haq, a heart that seeks the truth and then builds a pathway towards reconciliation, I'm very afraid of our future, not just my future, but the future of everybody else around us. Because, like Catwoman said to the Batman, Mr. Wayne, it's time to batten down your hatchets, because once the storm hits, you are going to wonder how you could live so large and leave so little for the rest of us. So if we haven't healed those wounds and we haven't had a moment of truth and reconciliation once the climate crisis worsens and everybody is fending for themselves, then I'm afraid there is going to be nothing that holds us together. No common glue, no humanity, no empathy, no love, and no connection to the soil. So that's what I'm focusing on. That's where my head is at. And that's the sort of sensibility that I'm bringing to the khwajasira community in my activism.
I love that. I love the focus on intersectionalism. I love the focus on kind of thinking of, again, intersectional activism, thinking of climate justice and queer and trans rights. I also really want to talk about how you just talked about truth and reconciliation, because again, the biggest, of course, rupture that we still, I think, the afterlives of which we all live in various formations in South Asia has been the partition of 47, for which we then see what's happening in India now with the Hindutva. Pakistan has had its own formations, and then the 1971 genocide by Pakistan in Bangladesh, which also led to ruptures of trans and khwajasira communities, which were interconnected, moving across borders, literally transcending borders and nations, communities. And I think talking about truth and reconciliation in that way as well, and kind of thinking of the role of trans communities and khwajasiras in that, as also connecting us across borders and kind of blurring, I think, these national boundaries is, I think, also a really beautiful moment. So no, Mehrub, there's a lot of questions, a lot of comments, but I'm going to try, I'm wow, I'm a little bit overwhelmed by this. I love that we actually kept the chats open, but there's some really beautiful questions. So I think, actually, let me ask, let's talk a bit about that in terms of solidarity. So Usha Air, thanks so much for this fabulous conversation. I have a question about trans South Asian solidarity. So let's, because I feel like when you talk about truth and reconciliation, you're also talking a bit about solidarity and, across communities and stuff. Solidarities and dialogue, is it there? What are the joys and challenges that work there? And the second question is, which I think is a good question, because I think we don't center this in Pakistan at all, is the question of caste. How does it operate amongst khwajasiras in between and other castes? Caste has been central to Tamil trans activism, for example, in India and the diaspora. I, of course, don't know much about trans caste activism in an Indian context, but I think it's important to bring it a bit in the Pakistani context. But do you want to answer that for us?
Absolutely. So the first question about transnational solidarity is that I think that has been one of the strongest features of khwajasira or hijra activism in South Asia, up until a certain point. And that up until a certain point is basically after Hindutva came in power, and we saw that, okay, finally trans people are being included into the conversation in India, and some trans people are being included into the national conversation in Pakistan. So suddenly, I think we also have our own version of transnationalism. And here by trans, I do not mean trans as an adjective of between nations, but trans as this identity, the idea of homo nationalism that Jasprit Pawar had coined to talk about pink washing in Israel, for example. I do think that heteronationalism has been present in Pakistan and India, and queer phobia and transphobia and homophobia has been used to denounce political opponents within the country, as well as to emasculate the other nation. So Pakistanis would often, emasculate India by saying it's a lesser nation, it's less manly of a nation, and we are going to defeat it. Similarly, Indians do the same to us. And now that we are including khwajasira people into the foray of citizenship and the national conversation, how do we proceed now? And I think this is an emerging discourse. And I do believe that we are going to see a certain level of Islamist or Muslim transnationalism versus Hindutva transnationalism. I do see it emerging. It hasn't crystallized yet. It isn't there yet. Maybe I am being a little paranoid, or maybe I'm being realistic. I do not know. But I do think this is a shade, or this is a nuance that is going to emerge, even if it is not majoritarian, or it does not represent the largesse of the trans movement in both of the countries. It is still going to occupy a significant position in the discourse. Secondly, I think caste in Pakistan gets reconstrued as class, because caste is fundamentally a settler society problem, which makes it a Baloch, which makes it a Punjabi and a Sindhi problem, right? because these are agrarian societies, whereas Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan are tribal societies. So what we call caste in the language of UP, that is upper provinces, that is now Uttar Pradesh, which is also the bulk of the people who made Muslim League, and then later on the Pakistani bureaucracy and the Pakistani governance. To them, caste was very central and very important, that what is your caste? Whereas there are portions of Pakistan where caste isn't that important and tribalism is more important. What tribal identity do you bear? And based upon that, you are supposed to have certain characteristics. So caste is not an overarching or a cross-cutting category across Pakistan. However, having said that, class is very much a reality. And khwajasaras are automatically considered lower caste or lower class or nichli zaat because wo khusre hain, because wo hijre hain. Unka kya kaam hai? You see, caste and labor are intrinsically tied together because what you are is what you do. So unka kya kaam hai? Unka kaam hai naach gana karna, unka kaam hai bheek mangna. So we, like myself, my other sisters who are out there in the public eye now, working in offices, working with the government, working in hospitals, we are fracturing that sort of discourse. However, Aziz, it's very disheartening that it has also given rise to this like cis saviorness, where now we see charity drives and people, saying, oh, we are helping the trans community by helping them get better jobs instead of prostitution and begging. That emphasis on the instead, that emphasis on how we are helping them climb out of a certain profession to a better profession is the sort of something that I call it like a caste progression or a class progression, that, oh, we are assisting these people so that they can denounce the bad labors that they have historically indulged in. And now we are allowing them to occupy these better labors that we all other people indulge in. And I do not necessarily see that as liberation. I see that as progression. I do not see that as liberation, because I'm really very sorry. Being trapped in a 9-to-5 capitalist economy is not the liberation that you think it is.
And also, it's also criminalizing sex work and dancing and kind of putting it in a category, which basically, it's basically very swerfy and all of that. And we get that, and we get that rhetoric, and we get the appeal of that rhetoric. And as long as it's raising a few bucks for our trans sisters, we are okay with it as well. Because we are like, okay, fine, we get it. Okay, yeah, you go ahead, go pander, fine. As long as you're raising 10 lakh rupees through which we can fund the ration of 100 of our sisters, or 150 of our sisters, yeah, go pander. We are okay with it. It's all performism. And, being sanctimonious and being morally performative is the hallmark of cisgender heteropatriarchal societies or cisgender people in general. So sure, go ahead, please. Bless us with your heteronormative blessings. We are okay with it. But at the end of the day, I think answering the question, I think this is the shade of caste that I see. Okay. There is a lot of questions. Mehrub, this is a fabulous conversation. As I said, I'm getting a bit, there's also been, I'm just not going to read many of the comments because I think they were just there, but I think there were some wonderful comments that were being made as well. Okay. How do you place, so Momal Ahmed asked, how do you place Quadricera activism within the broader context of the struggle for women's rights and equity? And I wonder if they're asking in a Pakistani context. Let's think of this in a Pakistani context, Mehrub, then. As it currently stands, does it seem mutually exclusive or toxic to you? And in what ways do you think this movement can be modified and decolonized further for inclusivity? I don't locate trans politics within the larger women's rights movements. And I think that specifically is the problem of cis feminism, because transgender rights are always a subheading within the larger conversation on women's rights. And this idea of the larger conversation on women's rights, basically what it does is it centers the woman as a body, the uterus as a body. It allows TERFs to come and basically take room. I do not locate it in there. I locate an exchange of power. I locate it as an intersectional exchange of labor in dismantling structures of hegemony. I do not locate trans politics within the women's rights movements. And when I do, I locate it as an ally that is standing right next to cisgender women and cis feminists in their struggle against patriarchy, in the hopes that they will always and also come and support us in our struggle against a cis heteropatriarchy, right? So both of us are not competing against the same structure at all times.
there are similarities, there are similar shades, patriarchy works in similar ways, but at the end of the day, trans feminism is different from cis feminism in some ways. Trans women's experiences and cis women's experiences are different by virtue of the fact that we are looked at as the third gender. So our struggle is basically as non-men. That is how I locate the two together. And I don't think that the movement is toxic. I just believe that when we try to force fit movements with each other, and when we try to create this one large movement, this leftist dream that we've always had, thanks to our white left fathers in Russia. Interesting as well is how we always talk about white supremacy in the context of the West, but we miss out on how much we borrow from Russia when it comes to leftism. And that is somehow not white supremacy.
Well, I mean, and right now what we're seeing in the world, like this, the supremacy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do find that a little amusing. So I believe that trans women and cis women need to be running their own movements, and they need to be with each other in solidarity. And I only have suggestions for cis feminists. I believe that all cis feminists who believe that they are political and that they have political groups and they want to be more inclusive, tolerant, and less toxic towards trans women and be more inclusive, there is an exercise that I want you to do. If you identify as a heterosexual person or as a person who's into people who can date many different people, assume a situation, there is a thought experiment when you are very madly in love with somebody and you ask them about settling down with you or having a relationship with you, and you talk about their exes and they tell you that, well, their most recent ex was a trans woman. What anxieties does that bring in your head? Penis envy, homosexuality, cheating, this, that, a feeling of insecurity, a feeling of feeling lesser, a feeling of your man falling for somebody lesser than you. Think about all of those feelings. All of those feelings are valid, but discuss them within your cis feminist groups. These are anxieties that cis feminists need to address before they start engaging with trans women, because trans women have been sexualized for so long that when cis feminists assume that they can walk towards us with a white flag or a hand of solidarity, and that they have absolutely disengaged from all the sexual anxieties that cis feminists hold for trans women, I think they're wrong. They're incorrect. They need to engage with these sensibilities within them, and they need to ask these questions from within themselves and then engage with trans women. Because all trans women have asked this question of themselves: what if we love a man and he falls for a woman? In fact, that's a reality in Pakistan, because a man has to have a wife eventually, right? So these are conversations that all of us have had. We've had them since our puberty or since our teenage, but these are conversations that cis feminists haven't had. They hold the best at their heart when it comes to trans rights. All of those things, they are very good. All the woke checklist is complete, but I'm asking about the personal anxiety that these women hold, because then that gets projected onto a lot of activists around them. So that's my feeling.
So we have about 5 minutes left. I know it's late in Pakistan and in South Asia, a lot of people are joining us from, and I don't want to necessarily, I'm mindful of digital kind of fatigue for people, but there's amazing questions. I'm just going to say some of them, and then I'm actually going to ask you to answer one of them, just because I think it's also important as Pakistanis for us to kind of think of our own stakes and responsibilities in the world. But I'll just read out these questions, and that the question I want to ask is about Afghanistan, because that's one of the questions being asked.
Okay.
But I'm just going to read. So someone said, Moiz, Mehrub, how did you find your guru? You can write that later. And then, do you think tracing indigeneity and queer resilience will help us unite South Asian identities? Or is it going to fracture the cultures further? I feel like some of that you've touched upon, also the capacity of transness as kind of moving beyond categories of nation state and kind of as being rooted and grounded in a pre-colonial, post-colonial,
Yeah. And appreciating diversity, as simple as that. There is no one way of being Pakistani. There's no one way of being India, because both of these are colonial creations. And this is something that hurts Indian people a lot when I say that India is a colonial creation. It never existed up until the Government of India Act was passed. So what are you all talking about? We were always a diverse region with diverse cultures. And I think that is where we need to go back, not go back to, but go forward to, is to respect the diversity that lives within, and not to try to locate Pakistaniness or Indianness within one isolated way of being.
And having said that, I mean, we also just want to acknowledge that right now, specifically in the South Asian context, we are in a time of increasing fascist kind of formations and kind of national identities, not just in India. I mean, India is, of course, a big thing that's happening, but also within Pakistan. I mean, we know this. Sri Lanka, where there's also incredible resistance and incredible activism happening. Someone asked, are you seeing a change among Pakistani society families where there is more acceptance of queer or trans youth? This is really important for wider acceptance and trans rights. And then the final question is about Afghanistan, which I want to kind of ask to answer as well properly, but yeah.
So yes, in siblings, definitely, and in younger moms that are now millennials, millennial moms basically, and younger, we are definitely seeing a shift. A lot of women are reaching out to me. A lot of people reach out to me saying, my mom is your fan. And as a result of that, I have become more comfortable in my effeminacy or my masculinity in front of her. I think dads are still a far cry across the world as they are in Pakistan, but siblings and mothers are definitely improving. I think Pakistan is improving for the good. I have a lot of hope, faith, and optimism in our country and our people.
That's beautiful to say. And the final question, which was about Afghanistan, which is, and I'm gonna just push us here a bit more because I also think Pakistanis, like, you know, well, so someone said, what do you have to say for other activists who look up to you, Mehrub, from countries such as Afghanistan? And here, I also want to just acknowledge that Afghanistan is like this, I mean, with the history of Bangladesh as well, Pakistan has had a big hand in the destruction, the plundering, the kind of screwing over of the country, which is never acknowledged in our politics, which of course also impacts trans and queer communities in the country of Afghanistan, which also has transcended, right? Because again, the border on the we talk a lot about the border on the east side, but there's also the border on the west side, which in Pakistan, which is also a porous border, also a transcendental border, also a border across which tribal communities have been moving across. And I guess just maybe wanting to add, what are our responsibilities there? What are the stakes for our work there?
So I would like to say that the trans community is probably the only community within which you will find Afghan refugees the most well integrated. In fact, most transgender people in Peshawar and Charsada, these are two cities. Peshawar is the capital of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and Charsada is another major city in the Pashtun region of the province. Most trans women over there are actually Afghan migrants. Pashtun trans women from KPK usually migrate to other cities. They either live in Hazara, that is my region in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and we are the ones who lay indigenous claim to those lands basically. And we have always been one of the most trans inclusive societies in Pakistan, alongside Multan. But basically, most trans women have run away from Afghanistan and they come to Pakistan, the ones that can make it. And the ones that once they get over here, I don't think their life is any better, because their life is just like that of any other trans woman in Pakistan, which is not a great life. And in particular, if they are dancing at events, if that's how they are making money, which is the main source of income for 37% of trans women in Pakistan, they are prone to more violence. Because A, they are performing in predominantly Pashtun areas, in Pashtun majority areas, where the issue of transphobia hasn't yet been dealt by nationalist political parties, even if they are secular or progressive. And I've been having quite a lot of fights with them recently, and I think they're trying to change their ways now. But Pashtun nationalism and Baloch nationalism are two progressive nationalisms that haven't really had a conversation yet on transphobia. And how there are trans Baloch people and trans Pashtun people as well, more particularly among Pashtun people, I would like to say. So there is this problem that Afghan refugees and Afghan migrants that live in Pakistan face more violence compared to other Pashtun women. And they can't freely move around the country. They can't get their CNICs made. And all of these problems do exist. Having said that, though, we know who they are. They live with us. We chill with them. We feed with them. We interact with them. And that's how it is. And our movement is absolutely not looking to cross the border into Afghanistan and go wage a war against the Taliban and to free our trans sisters over there. I wish we could have fought that fight, but we can't fight that fight. So all we can do is fight for our trans sisters, our Pashtun sisters, and our Afghan sisters who are now in our country. That's the best we can do. And we are trying to do that as best as we can.
I will sort of stop taking questions on this note. I think this is a beautiful note to end on. I also wanted to say that, like, this is so important as well to kind of think of transness as a future kind of capacity where we can think of as I think when we talk about climate justice, when you talk about kind of the post-national justice, kind of thinking against fascism, thinking against imperialism, which of course is the construction of Afghanistan, and also thinking of truth and reconciliation, which is dealing with our fractured histories I think it's just so powerful to think of the capacities of trans activism and Quadricera activism to kind of think of all of these topics and maybe be a trailblazer. Mehrub, thank you so much. I'm so delighted. I'm moving back to Pakistan in 2 months, and you make me excited about that. You know that I've had anxieties around that, which, you know, we know some of that, but that you are there doing this for us. Well, with a lot of, I just want to acknowledge, there's hundreds and thousands of trans Quadricera activists in Pakistan, Bindi Arana, Sophia Afsar, there's artists, there's people you're working with, Surkhina, there's so many people. I know you're not alone. And I also know that the world makes everything about individual. And I know we've also been wanting to push against that and think about collective frameworks. So thank you so much. Thanks to Stanford for hosting us. Thank you all for joining. This is recorded, so it will be up on YouTube later if you want to share with your, I don't know, students or something, inspire some more people in the world in the future. And we will see you soon in the world. Mehrub,
thank you so much.
Other... Sorry.
Thank you so much for having me over, Aziz. And you know that I'm starting my own podcast soon, which is only going to platform trans voices. And the GoFundMe for it is live. I've already, I think, made over $2,000, which is a good amount of money. But I want to make some more so that I can hire a team and pay them. And they're also going to be from within the community.
I have to find.
And we are going. Sorry. Yeah, whenever you find that link, send it over. All people over here who believe that you know some rich expats or rich white people who have some level of imperial guilt in them, which they want to pay back for, please, by all means, go and spread my GoFundMe.
Wait, I'm just putting the link here. I just found it. Here you go. All right. And thank you so much to Lalita and Simrat for your work and your labor running this center and kind of bringing us our voices and kind of bringing all these various communities in dialogue. I love that it's also trailblazing in that way.